Hi there! This is my reaction to House of the Dragon Season 3, Episode 5. Now, I keep these succinct by focusing on the top 7 most notable points about an episode, which was difficult for this one because it has so many different subplots in an ensemble format. I mean that in a good way, but it's why it took me so long to narrow down my script here. I had to split things off. That's why this review is coming out a bit late. I tried to keep it within time limits, which directly leads into the main source of that, point 1 of 7. This was easily their most balanced episode between different subplots, that it covered a large number of POV subplots in an ensemble format, while successfully giving significant development to each of them. And in many cases, these subplots were expanding beyond the core trio of cast members, Rhaenyra, Daemon, Alicent. And this was a specific criticism of Season 2, that it's like late Game of Thrones, you're over-focusing on the core ones, needs to split out more. By my count, this had 7 different subplots in it. Rhaenyra and Daemon were in the same one, and then there was Alicent, so of the 7, 5 of them, the core trio, weren't physically on screen for. This felt like a classic Game of Thrones Season 3 episode, where they also were managing to cover between 6 to 7 or so major subplots, and do it well. Now, in my original script for this, I talked about this for over 20 minutes, just on this point alone, about the nature of ensembles, and do you have lead actors or not, and balancing everything. So this is relatively brief here, just because I've split off a whole other video about it. But I'm putting it right at the beginning to emphasize how important it was as point 1, and it encompasses everything else. This was a really good ensemble format episode. But moving along. Point 2 of 7. Helena's pregnancy and the fallout from that. Introduced briefly at the end of last episode, and as we hoped, this introduced great drama scenes. That we were worried Alicent and Helaena wouldn't have much to do at this point in the story, which is exactly why they needed to add back something like this. This is their version of Maelor the Missing, as George R. R. Martin called him. And I have to say, Fia Saban gave the strongest performance of the episode. Well, I know it's an ensemble format, different stories, everyone had good performances, but this was some of Fia Saban's best work on the whole series. Really thinking on it, Helaena has never outright yelled before, giving a ranged performance like that. And it's been a subtle performance. I know it's that she's on the autistic spectrum, that a lot of it is subtle cues, which the actress handles well. It's not all about overacting and chewing the scenery, but still great content for Helaena, who we felt last year was underused. That was actually one of the things on my 7-point checklist of things they needed to fix in Season 3, like I said before, was give Helaena more to do. That relative to the setup you gave her for the TV show, she didn't have enough screen time. Now she is, and this is actually 2 different points, because the other one was don't overplay Rhaenysent, that Alicent needs to have an adversarial relationship with Rhaenyra again. Compared to how people were really worried about that in the Season 2 finale, Alicent is terrified of Rhaenyra in this episode, how she'll react. Even though they don't actually share the screen together at any point, she is really emphasizing Rhaenyra will kill this child or use it as a hostage. She is terrified not of Daemon, she says Rhaenyra, what Rhaenyra will do. So thinking on it, that really turned around, as we hoped, that eased back on that part of Rhaenysent, that they should still have tension, of course, but that there should be friction, never fully enemies, never fully friends. That's really what the core of the drama is. The whole scene was great. It's an invented scene. I mean, the dialogue and everything. Great performances, great dialogue. It felt logical, natural, that I think, at least, tell me in the comments, I don't think it presented Alicent as irrational or unsympathetic. At the same time, she is desperately trying to force her daughter to take moon tea to end her pregnancy, but she spells it out in dialogue, frightened, if you give birth, this child will either be killed or be a hostage or a pawn. I was worried people would really hate on that. I've been looking at reactor channels, major reactor channels. Most of them generally went, I can see why Alicent would do that. They're in a terrible position here, even though it sounds horrible. I've seen multiple ones saying that. So, great performances. I felt it was in character. It really is fixing. We needed Helaena to have great stuff via Saban. I'm just loving whenever she blesses our screen. And it's also fixing the Alicent tension with Rhaenyra. Speaking of my 7-point checklist, another major thing this episode turned right was point 3 of 7. Aemond's emotional development arc at Harrenhal has just begun. That this was another thing on the checklist, that widespread criticism after Season 2 was that he become too much of a two-dimensional villain, when we actually want to show him as a multifaceted character with conflicting emotions and motivations and everything. Great thing is I just saw a post-episode interview for this in the LA Times with both actor Ewan Mitchell and showrunner Ryan Condal. They were both giving quotes to this text interview. Ryan Condal actually said, direct quote, "We don't want Aemond to become a straightforward anime villain." That, word for word, he said he's not going to become some generic anime villain. He acknowledged that fear and that they're trying to avoid that now, and that is what his arc at Harrenhal is attempting to fix. So, that is great. That was another thing specifically on my checklist. The checklist no longer exists because there's only like 2 things onto them I'm still worried about, like merging Rhaena and everything. So many things that we were worried about, they have actually addressed. Whether they have enough time to get to everything else, that relative to the point we were at when Season 2 ended, Season 3 has fixed so many things. And also just in terms of narrative structure, I love how they put it in the same episode with Aegon here, that these alternating scenes within the same episode between different POV chapters, as it were, juxtaposing with Aegon, that each of them in their own way is complaining, "Mother loved my brother better than she loved me." She loved Aegon, he was eldest. Aegon thinks, I was passed over. Everyone loved Aemond. He was the ace. He was the best at everything. But that's true. Brothers, sisters too, I guess. Everyone thinks, oh no, the other one is the favorite. So this is great family drama stuff. It's really examining both of them. The only thing I'm mildly concerned about with this is that whatever dream visions Aemond had were left off-screen. He just wakes up from a nightmare and describes, Aegon was on fire and he was dragging me down to the darkness, and oh my god, and all that. And you can do that for pacing reasons in this, but I'm hoping that we get a few dream visions later. It's not the end of the season. That other channels have said this. We're worried that they're overcorrecting after the backlash to the Daemon dream visions last season. We actually enjoyed those. I mean, the first ones. The criticism wasn't that you're having dreams, it's that you had one too many. Like, by episodes 5 and 6, some of them were redundant, but the first ones in, like, episode 4, we thought really innovative. They were interesting. So, I'm okay with having fewer dream visions with Aemond, but have a quick one here or there, just because it'd be interesting. Point 4 of 7. The extensive High Valyrian dialogue scene between Rhaenyra and Daemon in the Sept. On its own, this was a great scene between these two major characters who haven't interacted that much in a while, because they spent most of Season 2 apart. They've had a few scenes earlier in Season 3, but great to see when the two of them are bouncing off each other in a room like that. The real reason I bring this up is I just have to remark on what a marvel it is that they do it entirely in a different language. Not like 2 or 3 lines. This was a very lengthy scene, all in High Valyrian. And technically it's a constructed language, but it has meaning behind it. Even if this was something like a spy movie where an actor is speaking French or something, but the actor doesn't know French, they learned it phonetically and with a dialogue coach, and they're working out how to play the lines, is mind-boggling to me, the amount of effort that has to go into that. The point here, the summary of this point is, they make it look easy. But think on it, just how hard it is that they had to give this nuanced performance in High Valyrian. And Matt Smith, who's used to, like, made-up alien languages and things from Doctor Who, he is, really giving a range of things. He's being playful and flippant and sarcastic at points in a different, fictional language. They make it look so easy. This is an accomplishment for these two actors, and they're really good at it. Point 5 of 7. Criston Cole's guerrilla warfare. Just from a military perspective to begin with, isn't it great that this show is presenting large army movements as a long and difficult process? As opposed to late Game of Thrones, where armies basically teleported around without obstruction. In winter. You spent 6 seasons telling us winter is coming, and there wasn't a single snowdrift affecting army movements. But on top of that, a big part of real warfare isn't just the main army's travel speed unobstructed, but that enemies will use harassment attacks to delay or divert them. They'll destroy bridges in their advance. And it's a game between both sides. Then on the other side, Oscar Tully uses counter-strategies that he accurately predicts Criston is heading to the last major bridge, so he sends word ahead, seed the main road with anti-cavalry spikes, because we know they're heading that way. So the back-and-forth chess game, if you will, of this. That's the military stuff. Character-wise, it's great how they played Criston Cole's arc in this episode. Just through the writing, through the pacing and directing, new director Nina Lopez Corrado, she really got the tension in this, that showing how as the episode progresses and it's this cat and mouse between the two sides, Criston's arc that he's getting increasingly desperate. Well, not in the sense of frantic, I mean in the sense of despair and hopelessness, but it's somber and resigned as things just keep getting worse. They lose their horses, they're trudging through a swamp, they're losing a lot of men, and then they already crossed the bridge. Oh, and if you haven't seen it, go and watch the behind-the-scenes video. Turns out they actually changed the final scene. Well, it was the same dialogue, but originally, Criston's final speech to his men was supposed to be fiery and energetic. Psyching them up that we don't stop until the stranger gives us rest. Hurrah! They actually show the alternate take in the behind-the-scenes video. But this is why we benefit from these live rewrites and bouncing it off the actors that we didn't get in Season 2, that they decided this doesn't really match the tone. So they changed it to what we saw in the final version, that it's exhausted. It's like a funeral prayer for all of them. Very somber. Resigned to his fate. Because Criston has a death wish. He's built up a narrative in his head that if he can't atone for his dishonor in life, then I'll be the tragic hero who makes an honorable last stand and goes down fighting, and maybe my beloved Alicent will hear a song of it. And no, you are romanticizing this. You are trying to be a hero in your own mind through your death. All you're doing is leading your men needlessly to their deaths. Because that's how he's trying to mentally process it, through that framework of finding meaning through what's happening in all of this. And it's really just needless. But that's good writing. I mean, that's what this character is, so I think that was very well handled and good example of working out things between the actor and the writers. Point 6 of 7. Cyvasse with history lessons. This was a lot of great lore references from the books, the biggest of which is, of course, that this is the first time that the board game Cyvasse has ever appeared on screen. It's a big part of the books, but Game of Thrones never even mentioned it, that it's a board game that's as popular in their world as chess is in ours. But it's sort of like a cross between chess and Stratego, plus a couple of other games. Well, it's mostly popular in the Free Cities, but it's starting to come over to Westeros, but book fans love this. And go and check out the behind-the-scenes video if you haven't. A lot of thought went into this. And I'm not just talking about the props. That they say, we don't want Daeron and Aemond just randomly moving pieces around nonsensically. We wanted there to actually be something behind it, so the props team sat down and play-tested their own rules for Cyvasse. Martin famously said, I can't really come up with rules as good as chess for a board game in a book or something, so they had to invent their own. They spent a lot of time thinking about it, and they walk you through how this is how the game progresses. They actually write down the 5 moves that they do, that they used UV light to mark it on the board so they'd remember where they were moving. That they actually came up with Cyvasse rules for this. Can't wait to get the merchandise for this, I'm telling you that. And just as the books use Cyvasse to establish characters' personality traits, they do that with Daemon here. I love that. That they give the story hint that Daeron's young, but he's as smart, if not smarter, than Aemond. That he's capable of beating him at this board game of strategy. Daemon is the dragon. He is not a mere pawn. And also, like several famous scenes in the book, particularly the 5th book, they, of course, had characters talking about real military history while playing this chess-like game, particularly how Dorne resisted the Targaryen conquest through guerrilla warfare. They mentioned that a few times before. This is the first time they really spelled it out. They mentioned Merry Martell by name, that they resorted to guerrilla warfare, they poisoned the wells, they pulled back and used harassment attacks. I also like how he quickly rattled off other histories that he's been reading about major houses from the Reach. That he says, I've been reading histories about House Gardner, House Peake, and House Osgrey. That this is really, I checked, this is the first time House Gardner has been mentioned in a live-action episode. Has been reasonably well in the histories and more animated motion comics, but no, this is the first time they've ever actually mentioned House Gardner, that they're the great house that ruled the Reach before House Tyrell. That they ruled it for centuries into the mists of time until they were wiped out in the Targaryen conquest, and their younger cousins and stewards through the female line, House Tyrell, got promoted up to running Highgarden after the Targaryens took over. House Peake will also be important going forward, we hope. We don't know if Unwin Peake is in this season, but we've actually seen, if you look in the background of Ormond's army camp, there are soldiers wearing Peake heraldry on their uniforms. So there's some presence with that. And best of all, House Osgrey. They're setting up House Osgrey. I mean, how can we mention the history of the Reach without mentioning House Osgrey? That they did all sorts of famous things, centuries ago, fighting off invasions along the northern borders. They were heroes of the Reach, they're very famous in their history. So we'll be hearing more about that. And finally, point 7 of 7, cats. Now, really, we were worried they weren't going to do this. That, well, in the book, after Aegon killed all the rat catchers, the rat population in the Red Keep exploded. Because, it's honeycombed with so many secret tunnels that you could never find all of the rats. Just as a human, you could never get to all those physical locations. So in the book, it was actually Otto who bought 100 cats and put them in the Red Keep to replace all the dead rat catchers. And from then onward, their descendants lived in the Red Keep. That these are the ancestors of the cats Arya was chasing around in Game of Thrones Season 1. That's why they have cats running loose in the royal castle. Probably also the ancestors of Sir Pounce, Tobin's cat. They switched it from Otto's idea to Alan's idea, but that makes sense enough. I mean, it would have been annoying if it just happened to be a brilliant idea Rhaenyra had. And I say this as a Rhaenyra fan. It would have been too on the nose. No, let's have Rhaenyra come up with the answer, but no, it makes sense, logically in universe that a sailor would come up with that idea. A sailor would be familiar with the issue of how do we deal with rats and mice in confined spaces we can't get to on a wooden ship? Well, we keep ship's cats. That is a thing in real life, the tradition of the ship's cat, which of course continues on into the future, as we all remember from, like Jones in Alien. So for a while there, we were worried they were going to drop this. I'm happy they actually put it in. So overall, we got a lore-heavy scene showing off the famous game Cyvasse from the book for the first time ever, between 2 characters, neither of which are in the top dozen cast members, or over-focusing on the core trio, but as one POV within an ensemble format episode. And on top of that, we got cats. Who could ask for more than this?